Good morning. Yesterday, after the minhag Ma'ariv, we mentioned the Alter Rebbe about eating meat during a bris, during the meal of a bris in the 9 days, and then so I decided to review it, and it has interesting discussion about the meat, and then at the end there's an interesting lesson from the Alter Rebbe about our general attitude toward Minhagim, and a very important lesson in the difference between something which is halacha and something which is minhag. So let's start from the beginning. There's Gemara in Gittin, Daf Lamed Ches Amud Beis. Those were those papers I found inside here. Yeah. So the Gemara says like this. The Gemara is talking about not eating on Erev Shabbos, not eating a heavy meal on Erev Shabbos, and it says here. There were two families in Jerusalem, one of whom scheduled its meal on the Shabbos day at the time of the drasha, and as the Rambam explains that the custom was that on Shabbos afternoon everybody came back to the Beis Medrash, and the entire community was engaged in Torah study on Shabbos afternoon. So this family were sort of blatantly disregarding the communal Torah study. And one of whom scheduled its meal on the Shabbos Eve. Both of these families were uprooted. So they were doing something wrong, and therefore they were uprooted. Now, what does it mean that they scheduled its meal on the Shabbos Eve? So there's two Perushim in Rishonim. Rashi brings two Perushim. One is that they had their big meal on Friday night. And really, you're supposed to having a big meal on Shabbos day is more important than Shabbos night, and so that was a problem. But the second pshat that Rashi brings is that they would have a big meal on Friday, and because not just on Friday, every day of the week, they're a very wealthy family. They were able to afford steaks every day of the week. But the problem was that because they did it on Friday too, so. When it came Friday night and it was time to have a Shabbos meal, they weren't hungry because they had already filled themselves with steaks on Friday afternoon. So this Gemara serves as the basis for the whole discussion in Halacha as to how much and under what circumstances one is allowed to have a meal on Friday, and specifically on Friday afternoon. So basically there's a regular Suda, a regular meal, which is allowed on Friday up until the 10th hour. And then you have a Suda Gedola, a big feast, which you shouldn't have at any time on Friday. You should never have a feast on Friday. And then we have a qualification. What are we going to do if it's a Sudas Mitzvah? So here we have a Shalah. Shalah HaKadosh is known as the Shalah HaKadosh. Very important sefer. Many widespread minhagim are found, have their source in the Shalah. Just comes to actually, specifically we're going to see the story of the Shalah quoting his Rebbe. His Rebbe is Reb Shlomo of Lublin. And Reb Shlomo of Lublin is quoted by the Shalah many times, and I think one of the most famous minhagim whose source is in a quote from the Shalah in the name of his Rebbe, Reb Shlomo of Lublin, is the minhag not to make Kiddush early on the night of Shavuos. That even if those who bring in Shabbos and Yom Tov early throughout the summer, on Shavuos they don't. The source for that minhag is from the Shalah quoting his Rebbe, Reb Shlomo of Lublin. So here he says like this, he quotes this Gemara that we just learned from the Gemara in Gittin. And then he says, when I was learning Torah in the community of Krakow, with my teacher Rabbi Shlomo, it occurred that my Rabbi Rabbi Shlomo of Lublin was a sandik at a bris on Friday. And he did not attend the meal after the bris. Right, which was a chiddush, even though you would expect maybe not everybody stays for the meal, but the sandik would stay for the meal after the bris, and he didn't want to attend the meal because it was Friday. So, why did he not attend the meal? He said, I'm going to make you a kal v'chomer. Right? The halacha is, and I'll quote you here from the way it's brought in Shulchan Aruch, that if you have a bris during the 9 days, and in the 9 days you're not allowed to eat meat, but for a bris you are allowed to eat meat, for Sudas Mitzvah. So the Ramah says here in Siman Tov Kuf Nun Aleph, the Sudas Mitzvah, talking here about the 9 days, Kagoin Mila, for example, a bris, or Pidin Haben, V'siyam Masechta, Sudas Erusin, we spoke about this Ramah yesterday, then you can eat meat and drink wine during the 9 days. Hashayachim Nasuda, those who are Shaykh, those who are related to the meal. We'll see soon exactly what that means. You should be minimal amount. And the Mefarshim explain what that means is that only a minyan should eat meat. Says Shlomo Avlugvin, clearly there was a minyan here of people. We'll see later even more than a minyan, but there were plenty of people who were eating as part of this meal on Friday. So Shlomo Avlugvin says, Madach, how do you say Madach in English? Madach in the 9 days, where it's only a minhag. It's like a kal v'chomer. We say something that's the proper term for it is a fortiori argument. Yeah, Rabbi Ephraim likes that word. It goes like the logic goes like this: in the 9 days, it's a minhag not to eat meat. It's not a strict halacha not to eat meat. It's a minhag. Now again, we've discussed many times, minhag doesn't mean that it's not so important. There are some minhagim which, my minhag is to wear a gartel, your minhag is to not wear a gartel. Wearing a gartel it's not the same status of a minhag as other things which are binding. For example, the minhag of Ashkenazim not to eat kitnius, it's a minhag, but it's 100% binding, and all Ashkenazim are forbidden to eat kitnius. Now there's still halachic ramification for the fact that it's minhag and not halacha, as we'll see later. But the status is minhag and it's binding. So he says, look, eating meat in the abstaining from meat in the 9 days is a minhag, and yet we say that that when you have a bris and eating meat is permissible, only a minyan should eat the meat. So having a feast on Friday, which is more than a minhag, it's a halacha. The Gemara brings a halacha not to have a feast on Friday. Certainly, only a minyan should eat. So now I come in and I see there's already a minyan partaking in the meal. 1 second. So therefore, says the Sandik, I'm not going to eat. Yes.
Why is a minyan required to eat the meat? I mean, the minyan is required for davening, for other, for brachos or whatever it's been. Eating the meat. Why is the meat specifically need a minyan? Why can't what I'm saying?
Yeah, good point.
Why even characterize it as a minyan? It's not a religious. It's not a
davar. Very good point. You wanted to say something?
So how do we know? Where I just missed it.
After brachas.
Where do we know that no more than 10 for Sudas Mitzvah? Where does the Shlaz Rebbe get that from?
He's making kal v'chomer from the 9 days.
No, I'm saying during the 9 days. So
9 days is
during the Sudas Mitzvah should only be 10.
Meat in the 9 days there's no issue with the Sudas Mitzvah. In the 9 days is the issue with eating meat, and yet we say that if you eat meat, when you are allowed to eat meat, only a minyan should do it.
Only a minyan.
So
I mean, that's not what people do, right?
I'm not sure what do you mean? It's not what
I mean, if you go to Sudas Mitzvah during the 9 days, you don't make sure that, okay, we got 10, that's it, everyone else don't eat.
Okay, so we'll get to that.
I never...
Yeah, okay, fine, we'll get to that. Now, in response to Michael's question, so that's a good point. I think that you're right, you're 100% right. It's not a dover shebekdusha. In other words, there's certain things that you're not allowed to do without a minyan. You can't say kaddish, you can't say baruch, right? This is not a dover shebekdusha that you require a minyan. But the idea is that it's a mitzvah to celebrate...
You need an Eidah. No, you should have an Eidah.
Oh, just like for bris itself. Set aside the meal for a second. For the bris itself. Now, technically, and this happened during COVID, you don't need a minyan for a bris, you just need a moil. You don't need anybody else. But we always like to do a mitzvah with Presumei Nisa, with a roivam, with to celebrate it, and with with the
Fanfare.
With the fanfare, there you go. So the halachic, obviously, you have 100 people, it's even better. But the halachic ramification of what's considered pirsum, what's considered having it a public celebration, is a minyan. We actually find that with Sheva Brachos. With Sheva Brachos is this interesting thing, because on the one hand, Sheva Brachos is it's not like Kadesh or Kedusha, it's just a bracha. But you're not allowed to say Sheva Brachos without a minyan. Right now, here it's different. You are allowed to have a Sudas bris without a minyan. But having a minyan, once you've had 10 people partake in the meat, you've sort of fulfilled this idea of making this a public celebration. And Mamela, there's no need to. We try to refrain from meat in the 9 days. Mamela, we don't. We try not to. You'll see soon that the minyan part of it is not so hardcore. Even it gets a bit. We're going to have a broader definition to minyan, but for now, that's the argument he's making. Okay, so that's what the Sandik says. The Sandik is, again, the teacher of the Shalah, Reb Shlomo of Lublin. V'ani amarti loi, so I, the Shalah, says to my teacher, Mazarayo, you're comparing apples and oranges. Bishla misham, avshalom titakona l'kvesuda, ama chalicha l'vayis b'har b'kumesh yirtza. Buy a bris in the 9 days, so we're going to limit it, only a minyan should eat meat, because you don't need to eat meat. You could serve bagels and lox, and have 100 people eat. You want to have meat, so you limit it to a minyan. But you have a way out. If you want to include more people in the celebration, so they could be included without eating meat. But in Erev Shabbos, there's no other way. It's not in Erev Shabbos. It's not about whether it's meat or not meat. It's about whether it's a big meal or not. You're not allowed to have a big feast on Shabbos, on Erev Shabbos. So b'meila, the fact that when in the 9 days we put a limit that only a minyan should eat the meat doesn't tell you that you should also put the similar limit on partaking in the feast on Friday. Because in the 9 days we have another way to include everybody by serving something that's not meat. On Erev Shabbos we don't have another way. It is a bit, by definition, a Sudas bris is a feast. Yes?
A question about the feast. Is it that you cannot put out a feast or sponsor a feast, or if food is out, you can't eat anything, or you can't eat so much that it impairs your hunger for the Shabbos meal?
I don't want to get into all the details of that, but the point is you shouldn't eat something that will compromise your appetite for Friday night. So don't partake in a big feast. Exactly how much is a little bit beyond the scope for right now.
So you could go and you could. I can't control myself, but
you can eat something. No, of course you can.
Is out, if you confine yourself, you can partake to that extent.
Yes, yes.
The response to the shlo is basically like this: if you don't, what you're doing is not participating at all in the Suda, right? And so you making this decision is actually completely compromising the what is needed for the Suda. Right. In the case, and in this case, in the case of the
right, you're okay. There's only going to be 10 people.
You're not showing up at all.
Right.
And the other one, you could still show up, be a participant in the bris milah. Yeah, you just don't have to eat meat. You could eat something else.
Right.
There's a huge difference there.
Exactly. Now, what's the Shalah's argument based on? The Shalah argument is based on the premise that you could have that to fulfill the mitzvah of a suda for a bris, you don't have to have meat. You could have milk. You could have cheese. The Shalah's teacher said no. You can't. Sudas bris must be fleshik. So if a Sudas bris must be fleshik, then a Sudas bris on Friday a Sudas bris on the 9 days and a Sudas bris on Friday are the same. And therefore, just like on the 9 days we limit it to a minyan, on Friday we're also going to limit it to a minyan. Now,
is that typical? People have flesheks at Sudas bris.
So
my grandson 2 months ago, my son-in-law is a meat guy.
Yeah.
Made this huge, or catered this huge meat thing at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, I love those.
Who wants to eat brisket and chicken
Right,
at 8 o'clock in the morning?
This guy.
So the reason is,
and it was,
It's an animal.
your son-in-law is very
It's definitely the
from.
Nefesh Bahamas.
yeah.
Your son-in-law is very from, and that's the way. That's the correct way to do it. The correct way to do it is to have meat.
That's
at
the
a
first time I've
Sudas
ever been
bris.
to a bris at 8 that early in the morning with meat.
In America,
Overseas.
we're how do you describe Americans, Harry? We just do whatever feels good. We're not into being so from. So in America, you're right. And it's not so common.
For nothings.
Yeah, couch potatoes. In America, it's not so common because, like you say, who wants to eat brisket at 8:00 in the morning? Now, maybe you should say that's the mitzvah. The Maisa, you're right. It's not so common in Israel. It's more common because in Israel, it's also, which is another whole discussion. In Israel, it's more common to make the bris in the afternoon because everybody takes a lunch break from work. A long lunch break.
Right.
So they usually, bris in Israel will be at 1:30 or 2. Even in the United States, sometimes you have people in the summer where you can do so. You'll have people making a bris dafka in the evening in order to accommodate for more people to come.
Not too late.
Yeah, in the winter you can't do it. In the summer you can. This time of the year you can.
Bris has to be during.
It has to be during the day. This time of the year you can make a bris at 6 p.m. You can't do that in December.
Right, of course.
Actually, on a personal note, when I made my last bris was 6 years ago, so it was taka in the morning, and I served parav. I served like salmon and parav cream cheese and all that stuff, and I also had meat. And I asked 10 people to eat. I asked, can we get 10 volunteers to eat meat? So myself, whatever family, we all had some meat.
These are sacrificial type of people. They became fleishik.
It's people who don't suffer from the
things that people have to do.
People who don't suffer from carnophobia.
What if
You might have been one of them.
I am pure fleishiks, FOF.
I don't have that phobia.
That's because you could handle black coffee.
And I don't envision an ice cream cake just falling from Shemayim. So I just go, okay, I'll eat meat, which I love, and I'll risk, not being able to have an ice cream cake later.
All right, so
never understood it.
Now, if you open up
I'm
Shulchan
always
Aruch,
planning my day around coffee and ice cream and chocolate. What's the slaw? What does that stand for? The slaw? No, you said
Shalah. Shalah is
Shalah.
It stands for Shnei Luchos Habris. That's the name of his sefer, Shnei Luchos.
Oh, it's his sefer. It's not an acronym for his name.
His name was Rabbi Yeshaya Halevi Horovitz.
Okay.
That's why all the Horovitzes and the Goreviches are Levis, because they descend from the Shalah. All right. Now, if you open up a Shulchan Aruch Hilchos Shabbos, so where it says it brings the halacha that you're not supposed to have a feast on Erev Shabbos, but then it says a sudas mitzvah that its time is to do on Erev Shabbos, such as a bris. The bris is today, right? So then mutter, it's permissible to have a feast. Kedir Ali says the Ramah v'chena minhag poshet. This is the minhag, in fact, that you have a feast on Erev Shabbos for a bris. That's it. Says the Mogen Avraham, the Shalah Kosav, the Shalah writes, that my teacher Reb Shlomo of Lublin, who is Sandik Erev Shabbos, and the Sandik did not want to participate in the Suda because there was already a minyan without him. The Shalah and the Shalah answered him. In other words, the Sandik didn't want to go, but the Shalah said to him that you were wrong, that was fine to go. Mm-hmm. So, what seems strange about this?
He didn't finish the story.
Oh, he didn't finish the story. The story is that the Sandik didn't want to go. The Shalah answered him back. But then what happened? The Sandik answered him back. The Sandik says, no, you have to have fleishik by bris. So therefore, the Sandik didn't want to go because he drew this comparison between the 9 days and Friday. The Shalah says, no, you can't compare them because the 9 days you could have a bris without meat. In the Shabbos, you can't have a bris without a meal. But then his Rabbi said back to him, no, you can't have a bris without meat. So the Mogen Avraham seems to be selectively quoting only a part of the Shalah and leaving us with the wrong impression of what the Shalah actually says.
Confirmation bias.
Right?
He responded, he knocked down the argument.
Right.
But then he had...
Seems strange, right?
Yeah.
All right. Now let's look at the Alter Rebbe. So he brings down all the halachas about when you're allowed to have a feast on Shabbos, you're not allowed to. Bris. And then he says like this: V'toiv, it is desirable. Shaloi lechel b'suda zu, ela minyan metzumtzum bilvad, min hashayachim lahasuda. Sorry, ela minyan metzumtzum. That only an exact minyan of 10 should partake in this meal. Oh wow, 1 second. I think this English has a bad mistake over here. Hold on. No, this is a mistake. This is a bad mistake. Nicht so darf man das lehnen. Darfst du nicht? I think he's translating this wrong, but maybe this will become clear in a moment. The way I read this piece is like this: it is desirable that only a minyan of 10 should partake in this feast. Levad min hashayachim lesuda. In addition, besides those people who are actually directly related to this meal, like the relatives, hashashvinim, and the you know the kfatzer, you know, the people who are, in other words, family relatives, and also people who are part of the simcha. If it's a Friday wedding, then those who are the shashvinim, those who take to the chuppah.
Was a wedding? What?
If you have a wedding on Friday, the shashvinim, let's skip that. It's just gonna. It's not really relevant to our discussion. Let's skip that line, right? Again, the way I'm reading this line is what the Alter Rebbe is saying is that it is toiv, it is desirable that when you have a bris on Friday, there should only be a minyan partaking in the feast. In addition to the balei bris, which means the moil, the sandik, and obviously the father, and other relatives. We'll see soon what other relatives mean. So you could have the avi ben, the sandik, the relatives, and another 10 people. That's how I'm reading this section. Now, the way they've translated it is, I believe, erroneously. In fact,
so the sandik, the moil, the father, and they're not going to be part of the minyan.
Exactly, they're in addition to the minyan.
Really?
Right. So that's
why if you want to minimize the people eating meat, it should minimize every 10.
Exactly.
People.
Says Michael, here we're not talking about meat, here we're talking about a feast on Friday, but same idea. If you're trying to minimize it, so a minyan is a minyan, just like when you have a Sheva Brachas, you need a minyan for Sheva Brachas, the chassan counts as part of the 10, right? Yeah. So here also, you want to minimize only a minyan, it's only a minyan. So the father, the moil, the sandik, the nephew and the cousin, okay, and then another 5 people. Why are you saying another minyan except for those things? Now, in the English translation over here, actually write that. The way they translate it is, I'll read it to you straight out of here. It is desirable that only an exact quorum of 10 partake of the feast in addition to those who share direct. No, sorry, 1 second. I was reading this wrong. No, they translate it correctly. They translate it just like I said. Sorry. It is desirable that only an exact quorum of 10 partake of the feast, in addition to those who share a direct connection for the feast, e.g. the close relatives and the Mailam Sandik. Yeah. No, they translate it just like I explained it, and it is correct. Okay. Good question. Hopefully it's going to become clear as we go along. Yes.
Is there I know when it comes to challah, wine, whatever, there's a minimum amount that you have to eat. Did you ever mention, is there a minimum amount of meat that you have to eat? I mean, can you just have a little bit? Can you have a little bit of chazayis?
That's interesting. That's a question.
L'chayra would have to be a
You don't
kazayis.
have to accept his answer. The minimum amount of meat, you don't have to accept his answer.
No,
You don't have to have a kazayis. You always have more.
So that's a zichra. Yeah, l'chayra there's no limit that way. But I imagine the limit would be a minimum of a kazayis, just like on Yom Tov, you have to have wine, you have to have a revius, and in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, you would have to have meat, you would have to have a kazayis, because ain't simcha basar. So if you accept the opinion that you have to have meat at a suda bris, then you would have to have a kazayis. Yes.
Okay, and is less than kazayis considered if you want to have milk afterwards, or any quantity of meat? Even a speck of meat,
you don't have
a grain of sand or less.
Listama,
No, I'm
as long as it's something you have to chew, right? Then
it depends on the reason. The mice of the minhag is that you
You
wait
don't have to
6
chew
hours.
everything. You take chopped meat. And you
Right,
can swallow
but
it
there's
straight
another
without chewing
opinion.
it.
There's another opinion that goes by your gullet, right? So then, according to that, it doesn't matter how. It
You
doesn't
know,
matter whether you chew.
you know where there's a difference between meat and chopped meat and other meats, perhaps. The halacha is that a woman is not allowed to eat meat on the day that she goes to mikveh, unless it's Shabbos, Yom Tov, etc. There are certain cases where I've seen, like if it's going to be very embarrassing if she doesn't, things like that, where I've seen certain poskim say chopped meat is okay if it's
Embarrassing?
chopped.
What's embarrassing?
You know, if she's going to be part of the family barbecue and she's not going to be able to eat because then everybody.
Why you're not eating? What's the matter?
Yeah. Why can't a woman have meat when she's going to the mikveh? What does that get
Because
stuck in
it
the
got
teeth?
stuck in her teeth.
Oh.
Okay, but that don't try that at home without
Brush your
asking her.
teeth,
But
boss.
But there is like a nafkamina and halacha, whether you paskin like the opinion of Rashi or the opinion of the Rambam.
yeah,
the reason why
but
you're
the mice-
waiting is
that's
suck
true.
in your
but
A woman
the mi-
open her mouth when she's going to mikveh.
If you taste
Okay,
something,
no,
just a little taste from the
no, but it has to be that if she would open her mouth, there would be nothing obstructing the water getting in. That's the halacha.
has to right. Even though she's not opening up her mouth to let in the water. But nevertheless, there can't be an obstruction anyway.
I didn't know that. A woman has to clean her teeth before she goes.
When Mashiach comes,
Yeah.
we're all going to have to know these halachas because men will also have to go to mikveh for certain things.
Yeah.
With all the rules. Anyway, a few weeks ago we spoke about the mikvahs in Eretz Yisrael.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, this past Friday, I went when I took Mendel to the mikvah. So I showed him. You see, there's steps. There's a big step and a small step, right? Because when you toivel, you have to stand on a big step. You're not allowed to toivel standing on a small step.
Wow.
Because you won't do it well.
Yeah, we're not.
You're afraid you might not do a good
You might
job.
not have your balance. Anyway,
Toivel of dishes?
Yeah.
Kalim?
no, not talking about toiveling dishes. I'm talking about toiveling oneself.
Oh, that thing you were talking about.
Wait, a few steps to go down into the water?
Have you ever noticed in the mikvah, you go down 3 steps, and then there's usually they design it
Like
this
a
way.
platform?
There's a platform.
Yeah.
Basically, there's different levels of platforms because there's different heights of people. And the point is that when the person is actually toiveling, they should not be standing on a narrow step. They should be standing on a place where there's a big area.
So let me fear of falling in or something?
Right, exactly. Okay, so let's just recap. We have here so far we've had really 2 questions. The main question was that the Magen Avraham seems to be misquoting basically the Shalah, right? And also, what's this whole idea of a minyan plus? Like, make up your mind. Either it's a minyan, it's not. What's going on over here? So here we have a Kuntres Achron. Kuntres Achron are notes that the Alter Rebbe wrote in the bottom of the Shulchan Aruch, which are often very, very long and complicated and very complex. This one hopefully is not so complex. And what's in the Kuntres Achrons, you often see the Alter Rebbe. This one it comes out a little bit less, but you see the Alter Rebbe talking about himself in first person, and he writes, I was debating how to write about this because I have this factor and that factor, and I decided to. It's like you get sort of it's not just Shulchan Aruch written anonymously. Here it's like the Alter Rebbe sharing himself with us. So that's a nice
into the inner mind.
Yeah, that's a nice thing. But anyway, so here the Alter Rebbe says like this. He says, first of all, he quotes the Shalah. Look at the Shalah. Now, so first of all, then he says like this. And it's all written shorthand. I'm going to try and sort of elaborate a little bit on what the Alter Rebbe means. First of all, why is the Magen Avraham misquoting the Shalah? So he says, Magen Avraham is for a reason. If you look, this is Taf Kuf Nun Aleph. That's in the laws of the 9 days. Later on, Taf Kuf Nun Tes. There's another halacha. He's talking about on Tisha B'Av itself. Where it says, the Shulchan Aruch says that on Tisha B'Av, I myself was able to do this 8 years ago. Baal bris, somebody who's making a bris, Lovish Begodim Acherim is allowed to wear fresh clothes on Tisha B'Av for the bris. Achlei Levanim Mamish shouldn't be completely brand new, fresh. Okay. Then the Rama says, "Va'avi haben v'hamoil v'hasandik," the father of the child and the moil and the sandik. Kulam nikram bali bris and mutar lubish b'gdi Shabbos. They're all part of the bali bris and are allowed to wear Shabbos clothes after finishing kinnis. So, so the Shulchan Aruch says that the Baal Bris, which seems to be meaning the father of the child, but the Ramah says that the Baal Bris includes also the Moel and the Sandik. So, when the Magen Avraham is looking at this whole story with the Shalah, says the Alter Rebbe, there's another whole point of the whole argument missing. Even if we are to accept the final argument of Reb Shlomo of Lublin that you must have fleshik by the Suda of a bris, and therefore it is valid to compare a Friday bris to a 9 days bris, and just like in the 9 days we only have a minyan, on Friday we should also have a minyan. But what does it say in the 9 days? In the 9 days it says that the Ramah says to only have a minyan, but the Magen Avraham over there said that the Bali Bris don't count for the minyan. Well, we'll see soon what the Magen Avraham is saying. So therefore, the Rebbe of the Shalah, the teacher of the Shalah, was wrong according to Magen Avraham for another reason. Not because his argument was wrong, but because he was the Sandik. If he was talking about somebody else, then it would have made sense. Just some random guy who comes to the bris, there's already a minyan eating, then you shouldn't partake in the bris. Okay, now you're making a valid argument. But you yourself, with the Sandik, is arguing the Magen Avraham.
Excluding himself.
You're the Sandik, you're the Baal Bris. You have no limitations.
Is that enough of a reason not to tell the whole story?
For the Magen Avraham, it is. The Magen Avraham is always very terse. The Magen Avraham wants you to come away with the conclusion that the Sandik himself was allowed to eat at the bris. That's what he wants you to come away with. So instead of going into the whole long, elaborate reasoning, he just tells you half a story, and from the half a story, you're going to realize that the Sandik should have eaten at the bris.
Not just a Sandik.
So,
the Sandik, the Moil, the...
Yeah,
forgive me, he
yeah.
could have been more terse and made that point.
I think that, I'm happy to be mafalfa, but I think that we might be getting a bit too far afield for right now. Afterwards, we could talk more. Okay, so in other words, when you read this Magen Avraham in Hilchos Shabbos, you come away with the conclusion that a Sandik should have eaten at the bris, and that's the conclusion that the Magen Avraham wants you to come away with. So that's why he sort of leaves out a part. So that's in order to make sure that that's the conclusion you're going to come away with. Now,
but he makes that point that the Magen Avraham says that the
Magen
bris and all that. That's like, does he emphasize that?
He does, because he says.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay. So I should clarify. The Magen Avraham says, he quotes, like we said, he quotes half the story, and then he adds 5 words. V'ayin siman tov kuf nun aleph sif yud. Look in siman tov kuf nun aleph sif yud. In tov kuf nun aleph sif yud, which are the laws of the 9 days, we have a Magen Avraham. And what does the Magen Avraham say over there? The Ramah said that it should only be a minyan, and the Magen Avraham over there broadens it to include the rest of the Bali Bris. Let's read that Magen Avraham. He starts off by saying that that the Ramah says that yesh lo tzamtzum, should limit who eats meat in the 9 days by a bris. So the Magen Avraham starts off by saying v'davka ha'ichlum mishum kurva mishum reis. Only people who could eat meat at the bris, only people who are going to the bris because they're related or they're friends. In other words, they're going to the bris because they're going to the bris. Those who are going to the bris not because they really care about they're looking for an excuse to drink wine and eat meat, so they're going to the bris. That's not allowed. Then he says, the Levush says to take only a minyan. V'yesh, however, there are some people who are more lenient than that, and they take yud milvat hakrev b'hashayacham l'balasuda, except in addition to the relatives who are related to the Suda. And not just the male relatives, but also the female relatives are allowed to have meat and wine in those places where it's customary that women are invited to the Suda. So the Magen Avraham here quotes half the story, and then he references here where he says clearly that the Bali Bris those who are shayachim la'asuda don't count to the minyan. So now you put 2 and 2 together and you understand what the Magen Avraham is saying. That's very typical of the Magen Avraham. Magen Avraham is written very terse, and you often have to work to decipher a little bit what he's trying to say. Now, so Michael is asking, what sort of sense does this make? What's this idea of 10 plus the minyan? And by the same token, you might ask, what about the women? The women don't count for a minyan, so why should they be allowed to eat meat? But Vaistois, the idea is that so two things. Now, elsewhere, I just want to add before I say that. Elsewhere, but then he says also by a siyum, by a siyum mesechta, only those who are coming because they want to be part of the siyum, not because they want to looking for an excuse for meat. And that, I think, is the big pirutz that we have many people you have in these places. Somebody comes, okay, we make a siyum, and now everybody has steaks. No, you can't do that. If the guy is making a siyum, and he would be making a siyum in January, and you would also go to his siyum and have steak, then you could do that in the 9 days too. But just because you want to eat steaks, so you have, that's the joke, that I make a siyum in the laundry room, and now my wife can do laundry in the 9 days, right? In other words, it's a joke, but it's a true point. In other words, the idea isn't like, oh, we can't eat meat, so let's just plug in a siyum and now we could all eat meat. If you are actually celebrating the siyum, then it's appropriate for you to eat meat. Okay. Somewhere here, I'm not going to spend time finding it right now, but somewhere here, the Magen Avraham, right here, in the next line, relatives means psulei edus, people who are close enough of a relative, close enough of relatives to be disqualified for testimony. So siblings, nephews and nieces, the minhag, first cousins also would be disqualified. Mekardin, second cousins probably would not count. So the minhag is not too, but so that would not count. So basically, according to the Magen Avraham, make a bris in the 9 days. Who can participate? And there's a discussion if this means in dafka in the whole 9 days or only in the shvur shachalbei. But the Magen Avraham seems to be saying in the entire 9 days. Who can participate? The relatives who are psulei edus, meaning siblings, nephews, and nieces, and first cousins. Plus, and of course, the Moel, the Sandik, and the Avia Ben. Plus, and that those relatives include men and women. Women first cousins can also come, and a minyan. Now, Michael is asking, what's pshat to the minyan? You already have a minyan. You have 10, 25 first cousins. So, the chayri, you have to say, and we're going to get to this at the end, that this is one of the differences between a minhag and a halacha. And Ramosha Feinstein uses this all the time. There's actually a book in the library published by Feldheim called The Making of a Minhag. And I haven't looked too much at it, but I believe over there he goes through some of these ideas. Like we said before, the difference between a minhag and a halacha is not in how binding it is. A minhag is 100% binding and obligatory for everybody to keep. The difference between a halacha and a minhag is the not the tool.
Well, halacha has a onesh if you attach to it. A minhag doesn't. Right?
Okay. Yes, that's after.
Isn't that amazing?
That would
violating a minhag. It's not like usher. It's not usher l'chatchila. I mean usher deraisa.
No, but of course, no. Of course, a minhag is not deraisa. There's things that are derabanan. But here, I'm not talking about how badly we're going to punish you. I'm talking about who's
going to punish you. But who's going to punish?
No, there's no punishment.
He's going to punish you for not following a minhag?
He's saying that's not the
That's not what's irrelevant. That's not the important. What should a Jew be doing? A Jew should do all minhagim that are part of his community's minhagim. The difference between halacha and a minhag is halacha has what makes halacha binding. What makes halacha binding? We just had in last week's parsha. Well, last week's parsha, Parshas Matzah, starts with the idea of vows, and really a vow. That's why is a minhag binding? Why is it forbidden for, I believe, everybody around this table to eat kitnius on Pesach? Right? Because our ancestors, no, not you. One second. Our ancestors took it upon themselves, kind of like a neder. We made a vow that we're not going to eat kitnius on Pesach, and they said that this vow is not just for us, but it's for our children and for our descendants. So B'meila becomes binding. Now, you could ask a question: what gives them the right to make a vow? Who gives my grandfather a right to make a vow on my behalf? That's an excellent question. We're not going to have time to discuss it right now. That is how, the mechanism. That's the word I'm looking for. That's the mechanism of a minhag. The mechanism of halacha is, it could be a biblical law, it could be a rabbinic law, but the mechanism is, the Torah instituted such and such, the Sanhedrin, which have a legal, a legislative capacity, legislated such and such, that becomes legislated law. And law has how do you call it, tools, has rules to work by, right? So, for example, a minyan is a minyan, right? Once you have 10, you have 10. Minhag, what makes the minhag binding is the fact that it's the minhag. It's not, so the minhag is the minhag. It doesn't make sense, it doesn't matter, that's the minhag, it doesn't have to make sense. So the minhag is, the minhag developed, as the Levush, as the Magen Avraham writes over here in the name of the Levush, the way the minhag developed was that you have a minyan partaking in the meat in addition to the immediate family. Says Michael, it doesn't make sense. Fine, doesn't make sense. It doesn't have to make sense. It's not a halacha, it's a minhag. If it would be halacha, then you would say, no, this is a mistake, and we should only allow a minyan and kick out all the other, kick out the people beyond the minyan. But because this is a minhag, what makes the minhag relevant is the fact that it's the minhag. So what determines what the minhag is? What the minhag is, right? Ramosha Feinstein has dozens of tshuvas where he, yeah. I'll give you just an example that comes to mind. Serving, he has a tshuva about serving wine that's not mavushal to somebody who's not shomer Shabbos. Now we know wine that's not mavushal, if somebody who's touches it, right? So a goy touches the wine that's not mavushal, you're not allowed. It's tam yenam. You're not allowed to
drink it.
Not allowed to drink it. That's the goy. Now the same is true. Somebody who's not shomer Shabbos, goy l'chol davar. So they're not allowed to drink their wine. So essentially, if I have a guest at my table who's not shomer Shabbos and I give him wine that's not mavushal, I'm serving him not kosher food, because as soon as it's in his cup and he picks it up, it becomes not kosher.
Mishum chasness, right? So he shouldn't marry himself.
Again, somebody.
Why is it not? Why I thought it's kachel chatchila, the wine, because it wasn't used for. It was.
It wasn't used for avodah zarah.
Avodah zarah.
No.
There's yain nesach and the stam yenam. Yain nesach means wine that an idolater used for libation to his pagan idols. Then that's the doiraisa din. The rabbanon din is that any wine touched by a goy is stam yenam. You're not allowed to drink. You're allowed to sell it. You're allowed to have benefit from it. You're not allowed to drink it.
Okay.
Now,
but you can pour it for them, then they can drink their own wine if they're goy.
A goy, I don't mind if a goy drinks it, yeah. But here I have a sticky situation. I have a yid who has to eat. But a Jew who's not shomer Shabbos has both problems. Yeah, a Jew who's completely flippant of Shabbos. Again, we're not going into. We might have heterim to nexhanish, but. Okay. Take a Jew who meets the criteria of Mechalal Shabbos B'far Hesia according to all opinions. So on the one hand, I'm not allowed to serve him non-kosher food, right?
So
but his wine,
him handling it makes it not kosher for himself.
Right? So they can't drink wine at your table?
So somebody asked...
That's the question.
Well,
they can't drink, they can't even touch the bottle?
Right.
Touching the bottle makes the wine not kosher inside?
Yeah. That's why you have mavushal wine.
That's
why you have wine that's mavushal.
Wait.
This is only the wine that's not mavushal. If it's mavushal, there's no problem. That's the whole reason why we have wine that's mavushal. Because you like this
solves a lot of dilemmas.
Okay, so let's go back to the mavushal part. The mavushal part is the wine gets the process of it.
The mavushal technically means to cook. We're lenient to rely on the fact that pasteurization counts as cooking.
Okay, the wine is cooked, and that releases its ability to absorb.
Because cooked wine because the whole basis is made to. The reason why we're so strict is because we really want to stay as far as possible from paganism. So we go really, really far. Once the wine is cooked, it would never be used as a libation on a pagan altar anyway. So Mela, the whole thing falls out the window.
Okay.
All right. So somebody asked Moshe about serving.
Did you ask pagans about that? Did they confirm that a pagan?
They would never pour mavushal wine to their libations.
No, what
do you think?
What are you saying?
No, wait a minute. We're following.
This is how you treat your idol.
We're basing this on a pagan minhag that they don't eat, that they don't use cooked wine.
Because the whole
question isn't what the pagans will do about pasteurization.
This thing about wine that's handled, right, is attached to that biblical prohibition, and the biblical prohibition is only a certain kind of wine. Why? Because that's the wine that was used typically for
Obviously, this is talking-
idolatry, which they
these-
don't use wine that's
These
mevushal for
words-
idolatry.
these-
So then to
Okay,
make that
I see. Oh,
attachment,
so it's we've altered the wine in a way that they've never used it, so it's not considered ever to be
it has to start with that starting point.
qualified for.
Right, Mr. Pestier,
It's
or
like
whatever his name was,
Pasteur.
he lived way past the time that these laws were legislated. So now you could ask the question: well, had pasteurization existed in those days, would the pagans have used pasteurized wine in the altars? Thank God we don't
They
need to know.
probably do today.
No, but the point, but I think pasteurized wine is considered less chashiv.
Could be. Yeah, no, that's for sure. Anyway, we're getting a bit too sidetracked, and I'm just
Yeah.
trying to make a point. So somebody asks Ramosha, are you allowed to serve somebody who's not Shomer Shabbos wine that's not mavushal? That's essentially the question. And what Ramosha does in that tshuva is, and again, you could argue with it, but he wants to argue that the idea of treating a Jew who's Mechalel Shabbos as a goy vis-a-vis Ayin Nesach is a minhag. And then he says, so the minhag is defined by the minhag. The minhag is that I shouldn't drink wine that he touched. There's no minhag not to serve him wine. The two are mutually exclusive. If you use halachic rules, then 2 + 2 = 4. If I can't drink it myself, I can't serve it to him. It doesn't matter. That's if it would be halacha. Because it's only a minhag, the minhag is defined by itself, and that's it. Okay, again, this was a complete... I just mentioned this, by the way, as an example. We don't need to get sidetracked with all the laws of Yain Nesach. My point was that Michael, your point is 100% true. Logically, there doesn't seem to be any sense in saying a minhag, that you could have a minyan plus the relatives. The relatives could be 30 people plus the minhag. Well, you already have 30 people. Why do you need that? Right, you're right. If it would be halacha, then that would be a 100% logical argument, and this would be a problematic din. But because the minhag of not eating meat in the 9 days is a minhag, so and therefore the allowances to the minhag are defined by the minhag itself, and the minhag itself is a minyan plus relatives, so that's what it is. Maybe there's another explanation. That's the only thing I could think of right now.
But there's the question of halacha, and then there's the question, assuming that the ones who originated this minhag had a reason for why they implemented it the way they did, is just an interesting, maybe academic question, but it doesn't change what the halacha is. Right, so the halacha is very clear. What do? Halacha, you do what the minhag is. The minhag is that besides the 10 that you could that not including besides the 10, you have the people that are the ones who are celebrating the simcha itself. But still, it's interesting academically. Well, why did they do that? I mean, I'm just saying, like, that's always a good question. Or the same thing with the Stam Yenim question with a non-religious person.
Yes.
Why did it not apply in that case? So it might be that there's a logic why the minhag from the beginning, the people that originated the minhag didn't.
It could be, but because so you could say.
I mean, it is kind of ridiculous to say that a person handling their own wine, right? But that when you have a thing, because mishum chasnas. It would be ridiculous to say that by giving him wine that it's lifnei iver.
No.
So I'm saying,
by the way,
it is logical.
Another time where some poskim adopt this whole approach is actually for kitnius, because what's the criteria of kitnius? What makes something kitnius? So if you say there's different opinions, is it this criteria? So for example, now there's a big shaila these days: is quinoa considered kitnius? So some poskim say, I mean the matcha is exactly the same criteria as rice. Okay, fine. There's different approaches. One approach is no. Kitnius is defined by kitnius. Anything that wasn't around, anything that was not in the original minhag, because my ancestors 500 years ago didn't have quinoa. So quinoa is not kitnius. Quinoa might be easier confused with wheat than rice. It doesn't matter. They refrained from rice. They didn't refrain from quinoa.
Right.
That there is such an approach.
It sounds right to me.
Okay. Now listen to this.
Wait. Were peanuts? We can't eat peanuts, right?
It's also machlekes.
What? So were peanuts in Europe in all those hundreds of years? No, peanuts are an American product that were created here.
I'll make you
created here,
Michael.
that were developed here.
I'll make you a commitment. Belina, if you remind me closer to Pesach, I'll do a class on kitnius.
That's good.
I mean, the whole
kitnius oil. There's a lot of.
You don't want me there with.
have to do it when you're out of time. Find the week that you're not here. Michael is here. I don't know if you could orchestrate this. Maybe I'll go give the class in Florida.
Make it a few weeks before Pesach.
So okay. Now here's like okay.
You're going down to Surfside?
I got a lot of opinions about this.
All right. Now here am myself. What does the Alter Rebbe say over here? So that's it. So far the Alter Rebbe has explained his psak based on the Magen Avraham that you could have a minyan plus the relatives, based on the Magen Avraham half quoting the Shalah, right? Okay, we've explained all of that. Now, let's read the Alter Rebbe again. V'toiv, it is good, Shaloi lechel b'sudah zu, that only a minyan should eat in this sudah. We're talking about Friday. Toiv, what do you mean it's good? Hold on a second. Where is it more important to abstain? From a feast on Friday or from meat in the 9 days?
Feast on
Meat
Friday.
in 9 days.
You say meat in the 9 days is more important to abstain. What do you say?
Feast on Friday.
Why?
That's halacha. That's minhag.
That's what Shalah says. Meat in the 9 days is merely a minhag. This is Shalah's kal v'chema. Meat in the 9 days is merely a minhag. Abstaining from a feast on Friday is a halacha. If you have to abstain from meat on Friday, right? I think on the 9 days, so that's a minhag, and kal v'chema to Friday. So something seems wrong over here. In the laws of the 9 days, it's forbidden to eat meat unless you're part of the minyan and the relatives of the. Here, the Alter Rebbe doesn't say forbidden; it says toiv. Toiv, it's good not to eat meat. What's going on over here? So if you just read this Alter Rebbe, and you know the whole sugya, so then you're gonna be confused. So the Alter Rebbe the Kuntesarchen tells us. I'll give you the behind the scenes script over here. Even though if you read the Shalah, you'll see that it's more lenient in the 9 days. Says the Alter Rebbe, the kal v'chema of the Shalah is a kal v'chema pricha. The argument, this a fortiori argument that the Shalah presented is pricha. It's a false argument. The whole premise is wrong. Why? Given the Medina Shari b'sudas mitzvah hacha, because the halacha is that on Friday it's permissible to eat a feast of a sudas mitzvah. Again, I'm going to a bris on Friday, and there's already 50 people eating. It's a sudas mitzvah. It's a mitzvah. If it wasn't Friday, if it was Tuesday, it would be a mitzvah for me to participate in this meal. So now I'm going to go to this feast and I'm going to make a kal v'chema. You know what? I have an opportunity now to do a mitzvah and participate in this meal. I'm going to abstain from this mitzvah. Why? Because there's a minhag not to eat meat in the 9 days, and over there we find that you should only have a minyan. I'm sorry. That doesn't work. Right. Again, this is not halacha, this is a minhag.
Right.
If it would be a halacha that you're not allowed to eat meat in the 9 days, and then we would say by a bris only a minyan and no more, then you could do 2 + 2 is 4 and apply the same argument to Friday. But because the 9 days is a minhag is defined by minhag, so you can't use that logic to then abstain from participating in a mitzvah meal on a Friday.
Interesting.
Wait.
You're taking that same.
The mitzvah is the bris.
Well, it's
the
a mitzvah.
It's not a mitzvah.
And well, it's not the same. Of course, it's not. It's not. It's a mitzvah to participate in a sudas mitzvah. In other words,
celebrating the mitzvah.
What's
always,
the mitzvah? What's the
participating in a meal that's celebrating a mitzvah is a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to attend a bris. It's a mitzvah to attend a pidyon haben. It's a mitzvah to attend a wedding, a sheva brachas, a siyum. All of these things are mitzvahs. It's not the same. It's not the same level. No, yes, of course not. It's not a biblical mitzvah. It's not an obligation. You don't have to go around town participating in every bris. But it is a mitzvah. It is a good thing. It's a good deed. It's a good deed to do.
No, I understand, but it's not a mitzvah that's obligatory. It's a mitzvah that's optional. It's an optional mitzvah.
Yeah, it's an optional mitzvah.
Right. So.
But the point is that you can't. I have an option. Call it an optional mitzvah. I have an optional mitzvah to participate in this bris. Don't tell me not to participate in this bris because there's a minhag in the 9 days. The 9 days thing is a minhag. You cannot extrapolate from a minhag onto another case. The minhag, even though again, if it would be halacha, so then halacha works with 2 + 2 is 4. right? This is a minhag. Minhag doesn't all have to make sense. The minhag applies there. It doesn't apply here. That's it. One second. Let me just finish this line.
Stronger than a mitzvah, and a mitzvah is stronger than a minhag.
Because since this minhag has not, in fact, as we observe, been adopted to Friday, as the Ramah says here in Hilchos Shabbos that the minhag is to participate in a bris on Friday without making any limitations to only a minyan. We do not have a chiyuv, we are not obligated to copy and paste the minhag from there and apply it over here. Our obligation to minhag, our responsibility to minhag, is only not to neglect minhagim that our ancestors have already adopted. As the pasuk says, "Al titish Torah semecha," do not abandon the Torah of your mother. That's your responsibility to minhag. Don't neglect a minhag which your ancestors adopted. Aval haschal minhag, there's no to start a new minhag in shum chiv b'davar. There's never an obligation. You must start a new minhag. Even though it may be a good thing to do, and therefore, like you say, that's why the Alter Rebbe says, "Hey, v'toiv, it's a good thing. It's a good thing not to participate in this meal because it's only an optional mitzvah. You have the minhag from the 9 days, so it would be good to do the same minhag on Friday. But I'm not going to tell you that. Therefore, you have to do the same thing on Friday." Because it's a good thing to do. It's not, there's no, it's a good thing to do because it's a good thing to apply that minhag here as well, maybe. But it's not an obligation because our obligation to minhag is only to uphold the existing minhag. There's never an obligation to begin a new minhag. And then he finishes off, Rabbi, think about the original story. What's our original story? There's a bris on Friday. Rabbi Shlomo of Lublin, a big Rebbe with many Talmidim, he's the sandik. He comes to the bris, he sees there's already 20 people eating. He says, okay, I'm not going to participate, I'm going home. Hello? You should make a bang on the table and say, hello, only 10 people are allowed to eat, the rest of you go home. He doesn't do that. Why doesn't he do that? He says, for this very reason, Rabbi Shlomo of Lublin didn't tell anybody else to go home. It was his personal chumrah. He wanted to do it. And therefore, and therefore there's certainly no reason to be more machmer on Erev Shabbos than in the 9 days, and just like the 9 days we allow the minyan plus relatives on Erev Shabbos, certainly there's no reason to be machmer for the relatives, even if there's already a minyan. But even beyond that, this is the Alter Rebbe's insight into the whole story of the Shalah, that even Rabbi Shlomo of Lublin never told anybody else that they have to go home. He himself had a personal chumrah that he said, I'm going to copy and paste the minhag from there to here, but there's absolutely no reason for me to impose this upon anybody else. Ad Khan.
Interesting.